Hello and welcome everyone to the McDonald Observatory live stream. Glad y'all could join us tonight. My name is Saul Rivera. I'm going to be one of the people kind of showing you around today and running this program along with my colleagues Jay and Abby. And welcome. Talk a little bit of myself. My name is Saul Rivera. I'm a public program specialist here at the McDonald Observatory. So one of my jobs is to show people our facilities, take them through like the star release and such, and run programs like these. And again, Jay, Abby, tells a bit about yourselves.
Hi, I'm Jay Spitic. I'm part of the K-12 outreach team along with Abby. So our job is mainly focused on field trips and teacher workshops, but we also help out with the programs here at the observatory, like the tours and the live streams.
And I'm Abby McNeil, and yes, I have the same job as Jay, so we got it covered. But we also get to do some other cool stuff with outreach, and get to do things like go to the library and read with kids too. So it's a multifaceted job and pretty cool. So is he gone?
I think we might have lost connection with Soul for a moment.
We lost him.
Abby, so do you want to tell him a little bit about where Soul is?
Yeah, sure. We can also talk about where we are versus where he is. So right now we have Soul stationed at our telescope, and he is looking at the moon right now, and he has it all set up. And so hopefully we're going to be able to show you a live view in a couple of moments of the moon right now. So Jay and I are at the old visitor center in our cubicles. Oh, look, we got Soul back. There he is.
Yep, a little bump in the internet, which isn't uncommon out here in West Texas.
Yep, we were just telling them, Soul, that you are sitting in the dome and you've got the control of the telescope for the live view today.
Yep, and so that's also why I look kind of weird. The reason I look kind of like in black and white is because we have a thermal camera in here, so y'all can actually see me. So I'm actually wearing a black shirt right now, but you can really see that because of this, and also why my eyes look really weird at the camera. But yeah, thank y'all so much for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We do have a moderator in the chat that will answer any questions you may have, or if not, they'll pass it along to us. Also, we also will do an open Q&A at the end if you have any questions then. So, but yeah, if you at any point have a question, feel free to jump in. And kind of to show a bit of where we are, if we can like switch to the next slide. We, as kind of Abby and Jay mentioned, we are over at the McDonald Observatory. So, uh, that more specifically at the visitor center. So yes, actually, there where that arrow is where I'm currently at. So I'm basically on the opposite side of the road where Jay and Abby are, and I am actually able to show a lot of cool views behind me. And something we're going to get to show today is some cool live views of the moon. So let me pull that up now.
Ooh.
Alrighty.
Yeah, really nice. So as it shows here, this is actually what the moon is seeing. Right. How the moon looks like right now. So the telescope behind me has a camera attached to it, and that's currently pointing at the moon. So you're seeing what our telescope's seeing right now. This is live. So if anything flies across the screen, it's probably a bird or a bug. If not, the men in black will escort us out the building. And offsite, and probably we need to call people and make some other similar things, but we should be good for the time being. And to kind of go over some cool facts about the moon, going to pass it over to Abby. So, Abby, what are some cool facts about the moon?
You got it. So one of the first cool things I wanted to talk about is how different cultures have been kind of focused on the moon for generations. And one of those ways that still translates today is that we have a name for each full moon in each month, that generally different cultures have different ones. So I'm going to tell you some of the ones that are the most popular. And if you're like, oh, I've heard of something different, then drop it in the chat, because there's like 6 names for each month. So January is known as the wolf moon. February is known as the snow moon. March is one of my favorite. It's known as the worm moon, because that's the time that the worms are starting to come out. And so if you wanted to know when are the worms most prevalent, apparently it's March. April is the pink moon. May is the flower moon. June, this is also in my top 3, is the strawberry moon, because this is whenever strawberries are ripe. So if you're trying to think about what season do I want to pick my strawberries in, June's a good time. July is the buck moon. August is the sturgeon moon. September, I thought this one was extra relevant for us right now, is the harvest moon. And that's because that's whenever we have like our longest days around now. And this is great nighttime for them to have good light to use to be able to harvest. So longer days, good time for harvesting, especially in September. October is the hunter's moon. November is the beaver moon. And December is the most appropriate named one. It is called the cold moon, because guess what? It's cold in December. So there's different cultures have different names for them. So you can look them up if you're ever bored of like, I wonder what full moon it is right now. There's like 6 different names for each one, depending on what culture you come from. So I think that's pretty cool. Another cool thing about full moons that we still use today is that we have 2 special kinds of full moons that you may have heard of. One of them is called a blue moon. And you may have heard the phrase once in a blue moon. And you wondered, whenever your mom said that, well, that'll happen once in a blue moon, how often that is. So a blue moon is whenever we have a full moon twice in 1 month. So it doesn't happen that often, but it does happen about every 2 to 3 years. So whenever you're talking about someone saying it's never going to happen, well, it will happen. It's just not never, just not going to happen tomorrow, probably. The next one that's a really cool one is called a supermoon. So the supermoon happens a lot more frequently. They happen 3 to 4 times a year. And it's whenever the moon is closest to the earth and it's a full moon. So those are called supermoons. And the next one is next week. So if you're like, man, I want to see a supermoon, they are bigger. The moon does look bigger and brighter at those times. And so it's on the 18th. So if you're excited for it, you can see that. The coolest thing of all is when you have blue and super at the same time. So they call those super blue moons. And the next super blue moons, we're going to have 2 next year, which is pretty cool. And that's January, not next year, I lied to you. In 2037, I was getting excited about something else. January and March in 2037 is our next super blue moons. So you got to wait for a little while to get them both at the same time. But if you just want a super one, just wait a week and you'll get to see it on the 18th. So we have a lot of cool different kinds of full moons. Seems to be a big deal for a lot of us. Oh, and hi to Bonnie from Taos, New Mexico.
Yeah, now there's been lots of highs from the Instagram side as well, including from Japan.
Oh, wow.
Thank people from a lot of places. And there's some cool questions that have come in. The one that's actually one that came in from Rusty Dangerfield. Lyndon, my 6-year-old daughter, is watching with me and asks, why is it a half moon sometimes, and why is it not always full? And actually, we'll get to talk about that in a little bit later with Jay. Yeah. And also, forgot to mention at the beginning, if it wasn't obvious at this point, tonight's program is about the moon, because actually this in a few days is NASA's International Observer the Moon Night. So to join on in, we're going to show some cool things about the moon. And again, enjoy this live view. For those of you just joining in, here's an awesome, what you're seeing right now on screen is what the telescope behind me, which you can't really see because it's really dark in here, is seeing right now.
Yeah, we're practicing the International Observe the Moon Day right now for you, just a few days early. So we're getting the practice out of the way, so you'll do great at it on Saturday. That's what we're going for. So something else I want to talk about. Oh, hello to Abby. That's me. Something else that I want to talk about is continuing with our cultural traditions about the moon in the past. So if you haven't ever heard about the word month and moon being related, in the Roman calendar, each month was based on the new moon. So like the beginning of the month was whenever the new moon came. So we were fully based on lunar cycles and how they scheduled each month. So that's moon, month, same base word, Mona from the Old English. And it's also there's some other conversations about menses, to measure. We would measure based on the moon. So the other cool thing I liked that I think is an obvious one is that the word in Latin for moon is luna. So I even know some dogs named Luna. So they're named Moon. But also sometimes we refer to Earth's moon, our moon, as Luna whenever we're using scientific papers, because there's a lot of different moons out there. We want to say this one's ours instead of just saying moon. Another cool thing, we are at McDonald Observatory right now, and something cool that we did here is whenever on Apollo 11, whenever they went in 1969 to the moon, they put retroreflectors on the moon, and we were able to shoot, starting like a month after then, lasers at the observatory to the moon and have them reflect back to exactly where we are. That's the cool thing about retroreflectors, is that light reflects back to its source. So we started doing experiments to be able to see how far we are from the moon at the observatory, like a long time ago. And so that was a cool thing that we get to be a part of history with the moon. So it doesn't mean that we've been to the moon, but we've been related to a thing that got to go to the moon. So I think that counts. I don't know.
Abby, can I add too? Because
Yeah.
hearing about those retroreflectors for the first time for me, it's kind of a weird concept. So I recommend anyone Google them, because it is crazy. It's like the Apollo astronauts are carrying a suitcase on the moon, and then it's this weird shaped box they have left on the surface of the moon that's still there. We're not using it because issues with our laser, but
Yeah, like from what I heard, it's actually about the size of a suitcase. Actually, like if you have a suitcase at home, that's about the size it was, and just took a handful of times for him to actually hit that laser. I've heard a rumor that they got on the third time, so third try. So considering the moon's like almost 240,000 miles away, that's really impressive.
A lot more accurate than I would be, I'm sure. I wanted before I keep going on, Steve had pointed out a pretty good opinion right here, is that not only culture but geography could also affect the names of the moon, because like thinking about different cultures, different places where they are, if it wouldn't be cold at that time. Yeah, definitely. If you, like I said earlier, if you get bored, look it up, of like this culture has their own, like indigenous people have their own versions of this is what we were harvesting at the time, so that's what we use. And they just do different cultures do different ones. Europeans have their own, indigenous people have their own. It's a really cool thing to get into. Also, we have another question. Can you indicate the location on our view of the moon of the retro mirror?
Let me see. I'll try to do that. It'll take me a little bit to find a specific area, but I can bring like my mouse here and circle around. So while I look for that,
Do you want me to keep going?
Yes,
Awesome.
keep going.
While he gets that set up, I'll keep talking and then we'll get back to that. That's a good question. So something else, as I've talked about the moon in the past, we also want to talk about the moon in the future. So as some of you may know, we've got plans, which hasn't happened in like 50 years, to go back to the moon and put people on the moon again. And so those are part of the Artemis program, and Artemis 2 is planning just at the end of this year, which we don't know if timelines will stay true to form, but at the end of this year, Artemis 2 is planning to go and orbit the moon. They're not planning on landing on it this year. But Artemis 3, the later one, is going to happen apparently the end of next year or later than that. They do have plans to land on the moon and actually touch it again, which would be pretty cool. And if you're wondering, can I apply to be a person doing that? I hate to break it to you. The application closed like at the end of April. And I think that that's not even the people for this mission. I think they were 4 years ago. So you have to miss it. Another cool thing that's happening that's planned for the near future on the moon, which I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if y'all think it's going to happen. But there's a lot of money going into it. They're planning with Project Olympus, the 3D printing company Icon is planning on making actual permanent structures on the moon that they're going to be able to use the moon and all of its natural resources to 3D print things like a landing pad or like a pressurized habitat so that people will have like the International Space Station, but like on the moon. And NASA's been funding this project with millions of dollars into it. Oh, see, look, we got another person telling us they keep shifting all the dates. I'm telling you, every time I've looked it up, they've shifted the dates later and later about Artemis. So we've got some updates from people that they think next year and the year after that. So we'll see when it happens. So
Yeah.
all the things I feel like in astronomy, when we get a date about it, it happens later than that. So stay
Yeah.
tuned for when we get to go to the moon again. But it's hopefully happening pretty soon.
Yeah, hopefully. I know from I've heard if NASA stays on schedule, there should be people living on the moon by mid 2030, if not earlier.
Living on the moon?
Yep, short term, like maybe a few weeks to a month, but that's the plan. And kind of actually circling back now, we're talking about the Artemis missions for the Apollo landing site. So as our colleague Julie Hizuma tonight pointed out, they were the retroreflectors placed during Apollo 11, 14, and 15. So on this setup, 11 would be about around here where my mouse is circling around this area. Apollo 15 would be not about this area over here, and 14 will currently be around this area. And also, I believe also some of the Russian missions left reflectors as well, but not sure which ones though. Yeah, thank you, Julie. Yeah, two unmanned Russian missions also left reflectors, so they got the rings from different sides. And actually, we're talking about the projects, the kind of like the things on the moon. Uh, the question that came in from on Instagram side, LaChark, are there many satellites going around the moon now? So there actually are a couple of satellites. There are some that have been taking some nice, really high resolution images of the moon, such as there's one what we usually call the dark side of the moon, which is more actively the far side because it's not always dark. And they've taken some really cool images now that more countries are being able to more easily launch things in space. I think Japan was sending one up at some point, and also some other ones that have popped up have been like some of the lunar missions, so like Luna 10 and 12, and Ice Cube Q. There's been actually a good amount, like actually just from the quick search I've seen of satellites we sent out that have orbited the moon. There's over 10 of them at least. So we've actually sent a couple of things. How many are still actively orbiting the moon? That I do not know. Ooh, that's a question from Arrow Maxwell. Do we know the last time the moon that was struck by an asteroid? And if so, is the moon still getting struck on a regular basis? Ooh, that's a really good question. From my understanding, I think it's been from I do believe there will be some debris that may bump into the moon, but in terms of like a really big asteroid, I would need to look it up. I think it's been a good while since you get hit by a sizable one. But funny you should ask that because over on the Instagram side, let's see, I just saw a name from Penny D 1974. Uh, the Instagram keys. I'm used to the Instagram side. Well, I'm not getting used to it there yet. Did the craters of the moon come from impacts? Yes, the craters of the moon came from impacts. And actually, I have a cool video that kind of shows how they're made. So something that we've done, there's a kind of activity we sometimes do during teacher workshops, which you can actually do back home as well. All you need is a tub, some flour, some cocoa powder, and a rock. And with all those combined, you can do this effect. So let me share that over here. So there's actually a slow-mo video of us doing the activity of dropping. So here we have a tub. It's filled with the flour, and the top layer we have just a light sprinkling of cocoa powder. So it's kind of to simulate how it is when like the moon's surface. Then when an asteroid comes in, it's going to leave a nice crater and kind of scatter some of the stuff underneath across, which you will see like kind of like almost like streaks on the moon. So even like with a live view on the moon, if you look over around here, for example, you see there's kind of like a line kind of right here, just from kind of when material crashes into that it goes flying out the stuff from underneath and kind of leaves those marks behind. Yeah, lots of good questions tonight.
There's another question that, from what I think it is, saying that they're asking about astrophotography. What I think from what the question says of why don't we take photos, and we do. There's a lot of people at the observatory that do astrophotography, and so don't you do some astrophotography too?
Not necessarily. You can say most of the astrophotography I do is getting prepared for these live streams. So
Yeah, so
if you ever
very
join
light.
our, yeah, if you join a live stream and it's cloudy, but we're still showing live images or trying to show what would be live, those are some of the images I've taken before.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about, I hope we've gotten all those questions answered. There's so many.
Yeah, I
Is
love
about, yeah, there's good questions. The next thing I want to talk about was pop culture. And so I wanted to just show y'all some of the examples of how the moon has related in these days or in the recent past, of what we were thinking of when I was thinking, like, what have we heard of? We're like, man, it came into pop culture somehow. So we have like albums or songs, like the whole album Dark Side of the Moon. We've got Fly Me to the Moon, a beautiful song by Frank Sinatra. We've got, a lot of people's favorite bedtime story, Goodnight Moon. And then movies like Moonstruck or Fly Me to the Moon. So I wanted to ask Jay or Saul or both, do y'all have a favorite moon pop culture reference?
So I definitely do, which actually I didn't even realize it. Like it didn't sink in until you and I were talking, Abby. Claire de Lune by Debussy is one of my absolute favorite songs. It's just beautiful and actually literally means moonlight. And so it's gorgeous, but also Halloween's coming up soon. And just like that eeriness with the moon during Halloween is just so wonderful.
Oh, I love that song. And speaking of songs, actually, like growing up in Mexico, there are so many songs about the moon. And just like even my grandma would do small stories, like a little song she would do about the moon that I usually think of each time I look at the moon. And I also kind of wanted to add in not just modern pop culture has lots of stuff on the moon, even ancient cultures have so many stories about the moon. Like people, you've heard of the man on the moon, but in some cultures there's a fox on the moon, frog on the moon, Jack and Jill on the moon. There's like another woman on the moon. There's so many different variations. And also the other thing for pop culture, I would say the game Portal 2, because there is a mention of moon dust and the moon on there, and I'm a sucker for those type of games as well.
And I was going to ask, those are great examples. I was going to ask to the people in the chat, if you have your example of your favorite pop culture reference, drop it in the chat. But we've already gotten somebody already telling us their favorite one. So I'm sure we'll got plenty more coming in.
I kind of wanted, my nerd site really wants to shout out Custer, the evil moon with the face from Majora's Mask. That was nice.
Yes.
Nice.
Very nice.
And also a message just came in from G, moderator, is that so any of y'all are outside right now, if you're looking low to the west, you might be able to see a rocket launch. Or at least like if you're like in the West Texas area, you might be able to see a rocket launch going on. Sadly, don't really think this telescope can point at it in time to see that. But that is still something that would be kind of a cool thing. So also another thing, something that came in through the Instagram side is to point at what some of the craters that we can see. So one of the cool craters that we can see, so I'm circling right now, is called Copernicus. And that name might be very familiar because it's a big thing in astronomy. And to get an idea how big this is about 93 kilometers across and 3.8 kilometers in depth, which 2 miles would put it at... See, I'm going to have the internet help me out because I don't have mental math to do that quickly. About 58 miles across and at about 2 miles deep. So this is a big boy. Yeah, so many cool things about the moon.
Yeah. And speaking of size and things about size of the moon, the last thing I wanted to tell y'all about is just different sizes of our moon and then versus some other moons that are in our solar system. So our moon itself is ranked 5th biggest out of all the moons in the solar system. They're currently, which could be, this number could change as we find more. We've been able to identify 293 moons that are orbiting planets in our solar system. And Saturn has the most. They have 146 moons. But Mercury and Venus, poor guys, they've got nothing. So they're tied for dead last. And the top 5 biggest moons, there's a scale to show you on the right side of where they are. And we've got Ganymede, that's the biggest. We've got Titan, Callisto, Io, and then ours, which for us, we feel like it's pretty big. But when you look at the other ones, it kind of looks a little, we didn't know it was so large. But whenever they put them into miles, it makes me feel a little small. I thought we would be a little bigger, but
Yeah.
it's just but yeah, ours is about a quarter the size of the Earth in diameter. And a fun fact from NASA is that if the Earth was the size of a nickel, the moon would be the size of a coffee bean. So kind of tiny to just imagine those two in scale. And on average, it's about 240,000 miles from Earth. So with our elliptical path that the moon takes, it's not always the same distance, but that's our average path right there. So to get you some more fun facts and more answers as we keep going, I'm handing it off to Saul, and I'll give it back to you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's been awesome. It's been so many nice questions so far. So, kind of a thing to add to, it's something change that you are correct. The moon is slowly pulling away from Earth about 1.5 inches per year. So, and won't be not that much year by year, space negligible, but in about 5 billion years, it'll be so far away we'll no longer have total solar eclipses. And also, speaking of like the moon and early on, the way we think our moon formed was when the Earth was still very young, basically just a giant ball of molten rock. A thing about the size of Mars crashed into the Earth. Chunk of the Earth broke off, chunk of the moon broke off, and well, not the moon broke off, but the Mars-sized object broke off to then become the moon. So there's actually a video from NASA of kind of a simulation of how that will look like. And they're even thinking that the moon may have only taken just a few hours to form, which is kind of crazy to think about with also how big the moon is. And again, the moon's a good ways away. As mentioned earlier, it's an average about 240,000 miles away from us. So you can actually fit every single planet in our solar system between us and the moon and still have room left over. I saw some comments coming in about some of the other cool craters on the moon, such as Plato and similar. There are a lot of cool craters on the moon. Actually, we did a live stream about the moon back in January with my colleagues Julie and Joe. And apart from talking about like some of the cool features you can see on the moon, such as again like the fox and the frog, showed off some favorite craters, such as one I really like, more specifically because the name's fun to say, Piccolo Mini. It's the name of one of the craters on the moon. It just sounds really fun to say. Yeah, and kind of, and yeah, we think moons are usually made kind of like as planets are forming, as the solar system is forming. That's when you get moons, and we may have one large moon, but other planets have different amounts. Some don't have any moons, like Mercury and Venus don't really have moons. We have one. Then you got Mars with 2, Phobos and Deimos, and Saturn with over 140 moons. So you can get some cool varieties in the moons. And sometimes a question that pops up every now and then is that as the moon, what will happen if the moon should get closer to us? So if something like a moon got really close, maybe not to us, but to their planets, they can sometimes get ripped apart by the planet's own gravity. So actually, we think that's happened with Saturn's rings. The way Saturn's ring formed is a moon of Saturn way back when got so close to Saturn, it got ripped to shreds by its gravity, caught its orbit, and became the rings. So you know, if you want Earth to have a nice ring system, you're probably gonna have to sacrifice the moon. So you gotta choose rings or moon, and also the moon can affect us in different ways. And actually gonna pass over to Jay to well, actually Jay's gonna talk a bit more about some things the moon does, and after that show us how the moon affects us. And also this will answer the question asked earlier about why is the moon sometimes then like half moon, why is it fully illuminated? We'll touch a bit about that on here. So over to you, Jay.
Thank you. So yes, so our moon's amazing, and like Abby said, the word month actually comes from the word moon. But we actually have a lunar eclipse coming up. So it's weird to kind of think about like, why don't we get lunar eclipses and even solar eclipses all the time? So the main reason for that is actually because the moon's orbit is at a 5-degree tilt compared to the Earth's orbit. So whenever we reach those exact points where those three objects line up, that's whenever we get those eclipses. So actually on September 17th, just right around the corner, we are going to have a partial solar eclipse. And partial solar eclipse sounds just like what it says. So there are three types of lunar eclipses. We have total, so that's whenever we see that beautiful blood moon that we like to call in the sky, the nighttime sky. But partial eclipse is basically the moon's is passing just part of the way through the one of the Earth's shadows, which that small shadow that you see on the screen is actually called the umbra. And then the third type of eclipse is actually a penumbral eclipse, which is whenever the moon passes through that outside shadow, so the wider shadow. And a lot of times we actually miss that eclipse because you can't really tell a difference, especially whenever we're used to seeing like those red moons or even those like slight red moons in the sky. So keep a lookout. If you are on the, let's see, the western hemisphere of the Earth, you're actually going to be able to see that partial eclipse. The time is going to obviously depend on your time zone, but here on the central time zone, which is where we're located, even though we're in West Texas and literally 20 minutes away from Mountain Time Zone, our partial eclipse will actually start at 9:12 and it will reach its peak at 9:44 p.m. And just to kind of back up a little bit, so it's really weird that we see a red moon during a lunar eclipse, but like during a solar eclipse, we see the sun blocked out. So in this picture, it shows a little bit, but I'll show you one that's not moving as fast too. So the reason we are seeing red on the moon's surface, especially during those total eclipse, is because it's all of that red light from the Earth's atmosphere actually being projected on to the moon's surface. So all that blue light that we see during the day, that's actually being scattered out. And that's what actually happens during the day here on Earth. And that's why whenever the sun starts to set, those wavelengths get longer, the light literally gets longer. And that's why we have beautiful red, orange sunsets. So kind of think of it as the sunsets and sunrises being projected onto the moon. So when the sun goes down on my side, yes, done. When the sun goes down on your side of town, you'll be able to see a lunar eclipse as long as you were on the right side of town. So unlike a solar eclipse, where it's really specific places that you have to look, if you were just on the night side of Earth when a lunar eclipse is happening, guess what? You get to go out and look, as long as it's not cloudy too, because sometimes those pesky clouds get in the way. But you'll be able to see a lunar eclipse. So keep a lookout. Again, if you're on the Western Hemisphere, and just kind of Google it yourself just to check the time, because you don't want to miss it. Because even though it is a slow process, it's still going to happen fairly quickly compared to, like a whole day. So that's just a little explanation. Hopefully that explained. And then as far as phases, I think the question asked earlier was phases. The reason we have phases is because of that moon's orbit. So even though it's at a tilt, it still gets enough of the sun's light on its surface that we're able to see more as it goes around the Earth. So it's actually not the shadow of the Earth. A lot of people think that. But it's actually the moon going around the Earth, and we're gradually seeing more and more of the sun's light. And so when it gets to that angle up here, the sun's over here, like so right there in that video, you see that would be a new moon. And then when it gets all the way 180 degrees, then you'll see a full moon because you're seeing all of the sun's light projected on the moon's surface. So that is what causes our moon phases. And then going back around, that shadow starts growing again, and we get back to a new moon. So it's actually really interesting. It's a lot of people, I guess, that think that it's the Earth's shadow, but it's actually just light being shown in different ways on the moon's surface.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and kind of in here, it's a little bit like the moon is going to like go into like the shadow of my head, being kind of earth shallow too. How to show again the lunar eclipse.
There you go. And actually, surprisingly, so I thought because it was easier to see lunar eclipse that they are more common, but actually solar eclipses are more common, but because the moon compared to the sun and the earth is so small, it's just you have to be at a specific location in order to see the solar eclipse.
Yeah, things to line up just right, like
Just
in
like
there.
that.
Yeah, and that's when you get a
Tiny little
total
moon.
solar eclipse. Doesn't line up always, but does. And when it's just a little bit too far, it's when you get the annular eclipse,
Mm.
or when it does part only a bit, it's just partial eclipse.
Yeah.
And actually, a question that has popped up, I've seen popped up on kind of both of multiple sides, is kind of talking about stuff on the moon's surface, but it's actually made out of them. So we call it the Lunar Regolith, and it's kind of a compound. It's kind of so actually when they were kind of analyzing material on the moon, they found some compounds kind of match something you'd find on Earth, and some parts match something a bit different, which also kind of played into like, hey, the moon was made from partially made from leftover parts from Earth. Yeah, so many cool things.
I know the moon's so cool.
Yeah, I see
Can we?
everyone's like excited as well in the chats on all sides.
I know
So,
we're asking
oh,
some great questions. I love it.
oh, the question that came up about is does the moon rotate? The moon does rotate, but it's what we call tidally locked. So it's basically as it's making way around us, it's rotating at about the same speed. So we're always seeing the same side of the moon. So what's usually known we call the side of the moon we don't see was known as the dark side because we thought it was dark, but no, it gets the same amount of light as the side we do see. So now usually more accurate term is the far side of the moon.
Yeah. So I'm going to just talk about a little bit more because the moon is cool about how it actually affects the Earth. So even though it is smaller than the Earth, much smaller than the Earth, and bigger than other moons, though, but much smaller than the Earth, it actually does have effects on the Earth. And one of the effects that y'all might already know is the tides. So the Earth has 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. Because of that pull from the moon and also the sun, it changes those level of tides. But the reason we have 2 and 2 is because of the Earth's rotation. So the 2 types of tides we experience, other than a high tide and low tide, they're called a spring tide and a neap tide. So the moon, while it is much smaller than the sun, it is still closer. So it actually has a greater pull on the Earth's waters. So kind of think of it almost like a rubber band. So the Earth's waters are the rubber band, and so the moon's here and it's pulling the Earth's waters, but it's also kind of slightly pulling the Earth. So it causes a bulge on one side, the side is closest to the moon. And it's still going to have an increased bulge, even though the Earth has also moved in that direction. And then the other side of the Earth is also going to have a bulge because it is being stretched out and because it's also being pulled by the sun. So we have spring tides during our full moon. So whenever the moon is on the other side, so it goes sun, earth, moon. So the Earth is in the middle. And then with a new moon, so it goes sun, moon, earth. So whenever those items are in a straight line, well, straight, they're still at a curve or a tilt, but whenever they're in a straight orientation comparatively, that's when we have the greatest effect between our tides. So we'll have the highest high tide and the lowest low tide. And actually the reason they're called spring tides is because it's basically the water springing forward. So it's literally the water is changing so drastically between those high and low tides. And then the other type of tide, the neap tide, which is a really weird word, but it means narrow. It's an old English word because whenever the Earth, Sun, and Moon are at a 90-degree angle, either our first quarter or a third quarter moon, they're going to have the greatest difference, the least amount of difference between the waters because they almost like cancel each other out with their gravitational forces. So those are 2 different types of tides that are affected by the Earth or by the sun and the moon. But also what's being affected with that gravitational pull is kind of weird to think about, but our atmosphere also bulges. It's not as drastic as the water, so we don't notice it as much, but sometimes the atmosphere can be pulled depending on the orientation of those objects. So if that atmosphere does bulge, it can cause a change in atmospheric pressure, which is something that affects the weather. And really weird to think about, but it can also make some of the Earth bulge, like the actual rock itself of the Earth bulge. And that one is definitely the least amount impacted too. So a lot of things being pulled by the moon. Okay, now here's the weird things I feel like people always want to ask about. Does the moon affect behavior? So with animals, actually, this is the coolest thing. So with predators and prey, especially with predators like African lions, which hunt at night. If it is a full moon, they actually decrease their predation. So they don't go out hunting because they can't skulk in the grass and like hide from their prey. So therefore, they're not going to go out. They're not going to waste their energy. And they actually will hunt more during the day on days of full moon. And even weirder with that, the days following the full moon, there is actually the greatest amount of darkness between dusk and moonlight. So whenever the sun goes down and whenever the moon comes out, they have the greatest amount of darkness because it is a wider gap in time. So they go from a night of almost like no hunting to several days of increased hunting. So it's really, really interesting. Similar thing happens, with sharks. So in some reef sharks, especially my people, if you like to swim, during the nights of full moon, they actually are found in deeper water because again, more light, easier to see. So they can't hunt as easily. But during new moon, when there's not as much light, they're actually found in shallow waters. So even just that difference. And so that's just a little bit of hunting, so predator and prey. But there's even behaviors with reproduction. So reproduction processes in animals. So this one's a little silly, so bear with me. But badgers, they actually get pee shy. So they actually do not pee very much during the full moon because that's actually a part of their marking their territory and going into their mating habits. And whenever they go into those habits, they actually are very vulnerable, like many organisms are. So they actually decrease their amount of urination during a full moon because they don't want to get killed. But yes, actually, Robert, I'm going to touch on that right now. The coral one is also really interesting as well. So miles and miles of coral will actually go through the reproduction process at the same time during a full moon. And no one really knows exactly how they line this up, but the reason they all do it at the same time because it makes it more likely that they'll actually be able to reproduce and carry on their genes, because that's why organisms reproduce, is to carry on genetics. So so there are some things that are lined up exactly with how much moonlight is in the sky. Let's see. Mesotrack wants to know, can you explain the supermoon theory?
I haven't heard of that one. So this idea was the supermoon, what kind of like earlier when we were talking about, like, well, Abby was mentioning earlier about supermoon, different types of moons. Usually when it's a supermoon, the moon's a bit closer to us than it usually is. The moon has elliptical orbits, sometimes a bit closer, a bit further away, and that might play into that if I had to guess. But I have not heard about it.
I haven't heard of that either. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, another thing I want to add was like the cool animal behavior one I read up on, which I also find the name of these birds really cool. They're called whippoorwill birds, and they actually do the same thing where their eggs usually hatch on new moon. So on full moon, they're one of like the few that actually try doing some of their hunting during the full moon because they're like, okay, we can see better. We're gonna try to get as much as we can by the time the babies hatch in about 2 weeks.
Yeah. So even piggyback on that, some sea turtles, which we know that a lot of sea turtles, they use moonlight to orient themselves. They will not only use the moonlight to kind of go and lay out their nest, but they'll even use the tides to kind of get further up shore. So kind of to add to that too, because the McDonald Observatory is a huge, huge advocate for dark skies. A lot of light pollution, especially along the coast, messes up these mating habits and these hatchling habits because they mistake this artificial light for moonlight. So it's really important for these organisms to survive that we have to make sure we are watching the lighting that's happening in their habitats. Okay, one last thing. So humans. We don't have too much evidence with humans. However, I did find a study that is still undergoing, so they're still finding out things, but they were looking into how the full moon might affect sleeping habits. So some people actually just sleep less during a full moon. And so there were two thoughts of reasoning for this. And one thought was literally full moon, big bright sky, might make it a little harder to fall asleep, especially if you're in an area like we are here at Observatory. It's almost like daylight sometimes outside whenever the full moon's outside. So it can kind of mess up your circadian rhythm. Another theory with that was that it was almost an evolutionary habit. So, thinking back to ancient ancestors, if they had to do hunting at night or just any kind of maybe movement at night, you would want to pick a night with the most amount of light. So, it might have just been something that kind of got ingrained into our brain over time with using bright moonlight. So, yeah, so that's a little fun, interesting things about how the moon affects us here on Earth.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and speaking of how like the moon affects us learning about the moon, as we kind of said near the start of this program, part of the reason we're doing this is because NASA has a big event called Observe the Moonlight coming up. So Observe the Moonlight will be in just a few days. So it will be I just had it. It will be on the 14th. Yes, on the exactly. Yes, on the 14th. Aha, I did know it. I just want to double check. Thank you. But yeah, like September 14th will be in Observe the Moon Night. So NASA's going to do lots of really cool streams about the moon, cool activities. Actually, check out just the NASA Observe the Moon site. They have some really cool resources for for everyone involved. They even have like a map of like how the moon will look like for that night and point out specific craters and different areas on the moon. And it's a lot of this to encourage people to, hey, make a day to just go up and look at the moon a bit and enjoy a bit, learn about us wanting to go visit the moon in the future. Which actually, on that note, a question that came in from Axer Laxer is they had a question of how NASA is going to be able to have people be able to be on the moon given the extreme temperatures on the moon's surface from the night side and the daytime side. And a big thing is, well, the spacesuits help out a lot with that temperature and keeping them safe. And I imagine with some of the Artemis missions and such, the idea will be creating habitats that will be able to keep humans safe in these type of conditions. What some of the science are doing for that, I don't really know that much of, but I would pretty sure that the NASA site will have lots of information of some of the things they're doing to actually make that happen. And even though they're the now observe the moon night is this week, and it's the big thing to go to encourage people to go to the moon, don't just use that day to enjoy the moon. Enjoy the moon every day. There's really cool things. There's recent people have made stories and songs about them through millennia. It's such a really cool, pretty thing to go look at.
There is one of the comments I wanted to show this one. The song, you're bringing it up. People have been putting some good ones in the chat. Moon River is a very good song. And I just love that song. And so I was like, if you haven't listened to Moon River, you should go listen to that. We also had a good classic, Dancing in the Moonlight. There's plenty of good ones for you to be listening to. If you need a playlist to listen to on Saturday, just go through these comments, pick them all up, and listen to these people because they've got some good options for you. Don't you think so?
Yes, the moon playlist. I might do that myself, actually. That might be
I'm
fun.
just saying we should make one.
I
Yeah.
also want to add too, because a lot of people have been loving the creators too with our live view. If you have a pair of binoculars and you're going out to observe the moon, go look at it with some binoculars too. It's amazing, even just with some basic binoculars.
Yeah. All right, so this is time for some. If y'all have any questions, this is a time to drop them in the chat. Several have been dropped in. So one from Wendy Andreen. Can you zoom in on some of the areas the moon tells about them? So sadly, with this view, we currently can't. So the moon is low enough in the sky. We weren't able to attach the camera how we usually do, which gives a nice zoom into views. We would instead attach it to the refractor, so like small telescope attached to the main one to be able to get the full image of the moon. Though there's a bird flying across. Oh, that's so cool. I saw something flying across there. I was about to move my mouse to point it, but just some off the top, these is Copernicus. Someone asked about these darker areas. They're the seas of the moon. So what happened is sometimes when one of the asteroids will crash into the lunar surface, when the moon still had more active core, but it'll crack the surface a little bit, crack the crust, and magma from lower levels could seep on out and plug that back up. So these darker areas is basically cooled magma. Another thing that came in from some Trace. Oh no, my internet. Oh, let's see. There it goes. From Tracy, was McDonald's Observatory doing for the lunar eclipse in March? So we don't have anything planned for the lunar eclipse in March because that's during spring break season for us. So we will probably just do a regular star party and have a telescope on the moon so people can see it during that. But we actually have done a live stream a few years ago of one of the total lunar eclipses, just had a telescope pointing at the moon the entire time as from beginning to end. And you could see, like, it actually was really cool because you can see how the moon's getting dimmer, how it's getting red, and you're able to start seeing stars in the background. If you want to see that, just check out one of our past live streams on our YouTube channel, just McDonald Observatory on YouTube. And also, we did do another stream earlier in the year called Lunacy. It's family astronomy, so more focused for a K-12 audience. But we did show off some cool craters and seas and other cool facts about the moon, and did have that zoomed-in view. So if you want to see what some of the zoomed-in views, more explanations, I recommend checking out one of those other streams.
But Saul, you also could say, if you just come to a star party in March, we could pretend like it was thrown just for the lunar eclipse. And just ignore that there's one every other day that week, too.
Yep, and if you do come during spring break, make your reservations as soon as you can because we usually get about 5,000 people in the span of a week or two. It gets busy out here. Let's see. Uh, uh, oh, maybe so. According to Chainsaw, according to Stellarium, you just saw a Starlink pass, satellite pass. Ooh, that'd be cool if one of the satellites passed between us and the moon. Ooh, kind of want to go back and see that later on. See if that's the case. See. Let's see if any other questions. If y'all have any other questions, drop into the chat. Now's the time to do so. Let's see. One I saw earlier. Let's see. Where is it?
There, while you're looking for it, so there was this comment that I saw from Bob Winter about light pollution being such a big problem. And I just wanted to reiterate what Jay was saying earlier about that's one of the reasons at McDonald Observatory we are such big proponents of dark skies. And if you want to know how to learn more information about dark skies and how important it is, not only for people out here at the observatory, but everywhere, just go to our website, check it out, and learn. It's pretty easy of ways that we can fix light pollution in our area. So just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, we are actually a recognized dark sky reserve. Actually, one of the largest in the world, the International Great Big Bend Dark Sky Reserve. And we actually do during the week of April, we do a Dark Skies Week. So it's all about these dark skies. So if you visit us during April, you might be out here during those events and learn more about how light pollution affects the wildlife and what we can do to fix that. Oh, a question from the Instagram side. Susie moved the 6 Ramirez. Are we going back to the moon? Yes, we are. NASA has lots of missions planned to go back to the moon, and they stay on schedule. There should be people living on the moon by about mid 2030, and that won't be long term. Like they're planning to do short term, so like a few weeks, maybe a few months, and as time goes on, expand upon it. Oh, and so here from Robert C. Bigfoot Second, sub on this live stream. Glad you were able to find us. We went over this yesterday in my class. I teach astronomy and love y'all's way of breaking things down. Well, thank you. I also love the podcast. So thank you all so much for joining in. Also, the reason I'm picking this comment up is because we do workshops and activities with teachers and schools. Actually, Abby and Jay are part of the K-12 team, so the team that's part of working with students, not just around Texas, but around the country. So we do programs with Connected Texas, we connect with classrooms. Actually, my colleague Julie, who's the moderator, and I are doing some sessions tomorrow about the moon. We have Connected Texas, and we do workshops for teachers to just come out for a few days, and we show them how to explain from how to planets form, how to explain dark energy, depending on the workshop you're on. So if you're interested in those, just check out McDonaldObservatory.org, and you can find more information on that to sign up.
And I think, do you think the podcast that he's referring to is Stardate, possibly?
Yep.
I think that's what he's referring to, McDonald Observatories. You can listen to it on Spotify.
Yep, at Spotify and the site stardate.org, and each episode is about 2 minutes, and they are really cool and highly recommend them. Another question from Susie. Please tell us about the dark side of the moon. So the dark side, the far side of the moon. One of the cool things about it is that it's riddled with craters. So the side we usually see, the surface is thin enough that when an asteroid crashed into it earlier on, the crust cracked a little bit, magma levels seeped on out, and left those seas, the gray areas cooled magma. The far side of the moon, the crust is actually a lot thicker to the point that that didn't really happen that often. So it's just riddled with these craters. It's actually a pretty cool view if one's able to see it. And let me see if I can meanwhile pull that up because it is a cool image. But we'll see. NASA, if not, NASA has some really cool images I do recommend looking up. And other comment from the Instagram side from Susie, if given the opportunity, I go to the moon and beyond. That's awesome. I personally am like Earth a lot. If I could be on Earth, maybe short term, I would. But I don't think I would go out there for long term. I like Earth too much, and there's so many things that can happen on the moon. It has weird effects on the body in terms of like gravity amount and this and that. I would go after others have gone. I don't want to be the guinea pig.
Yeah, your bone density gets messed up the longer you're up there. So I think I'm going to stay on the Earth as much as possible.
Yep. Alrighty. So, from Instagram side, wait, so we don't typically see one side of the moon. We do always see kind of the same side of the moon because the moon has its tidally locked, so it's basically rotating at the same time as orbiting us. Just the dark side, the far side, is the side we don't really see. But NASA has sent satellites to go around the moon to see these really cool zoomed-in views and really awesome pictures of it. All right, so I believe we're kind of running low on time. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. If you want to check out this live stream or any of the other ones, just go to McDonald Observatory on YouTube. We have done over 60 of these streams before, from the moon to planets to live streams from the control rooms to books we recommend, bit of everything. So if you want to go check this out, do highly recommend them. We try doing these streams about once a month. Just say on one of our socials. So McDonald Observatory on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. We usually make a post a few days before the streams go up. And thank y'all so much for joining in. Also, feel free to visit us. So if you ever want to visit us, just go. We're out here in West Texas. We do have a visitor center. Actually, all of us here on the stream tonight, like my co-host and our moderator, are visitor center staff. So we get to show people the telescopes, research telescopes, and cool views through the telescopes, like the one behind me. Not with the camera, but actually looking on right on through. We do recommend to make reservations ahead of time, just because during certain times of the year it can get really full and don't want you all to drive like 500 miles here and not to get joined on the program. And also we do have a gift shop you can buy stuff from, and of course Star Date to learn more about what's going on the science side and other cool science facts. And yeah, thank y'all so much. Yeah, and hopefully catch y'all next time. Y'all have a good night.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.